Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to turn on live captions and subtitles, or if you'd like a recording of the presentation, please check the chat box. There's information, the same information as this slide in there, telling you how to do that. Today, Keith Fox, our IECC lead, will be talking about the residential IECC checklist that has recently been rolled out. Before he does that, I'm Christy Collins. I work on the CPD team on our high performance buildings efforts, and I'd like to just take about 5 minutes to talk through a little bit of context for why we created the checklist and how it's intended to be used. We are responding in the city to a lot of input from the community, and we do that by working through changes to our codes and continuing that dialogue with the community on an ongoing rolling basis. It's changing the status quo. So we have a lot of ongoing climate work in Denver. We know that there's a lot of uncertainty in the development community in Denver, but we also have the community continuing to come to us with really high goals related to equity, response to climate change, and affordability. And to take care of Denver's long-term viability as a community, we have to address all three together. So the codes that we're changing as we move ahead through each code cycle are a response to the community coming and speaking to us, and then us holding a series of different engagement opportunities with the community and different committee conversations, then creating plans that document what the community is telling us we should be targeting. Then we move on to enforceable regulations, and once those regulations exist, we create a series of tools like the checklist to support everybody in succeeding in meeting the requirements of the regulations. So the community and the market and the regulations have to move together forward, but we answer to the community and the market with those regulations. We're not making them up in a bubble. It's important for us to mention the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability and Resiliency, which was created in January of this year. The members of that team existed previously as a sort of subsection of DVPHE, but in January they became their own office, reporting directly to the mayor with their own executive director. They also, in this past election, gained a whole bunch more funding, thank you to the voters, to support the work that they're doing. The code changes that we're making tie into the work that they're doing. The first thing that they passed as a team about 2.5 years ago was the Denver 80 by 50 plan. That committed Denver to reducing greenhouse gas emissions 80% below 2005 levels by 2050. We know that buildings contribute 63% of Denver's greenhouse gas emissions, and that by 2050, 40% of the buildings that are standing will have been built between now and then. So new buildings really matter. Existing buildings and cleaning up the grid also really matter. Those are ongoing efforts that are happening at the same time, but our codes affect our new buildings and homes. So that plan, the 80 by 50 plan, committed Denver to reaching zero net energy with all new buildings and homes by 2035. That has now shifted to 2030 in response to a series of conversations that the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability and Resiliency team, I'll call them CASR, had with the community for about 6 months in the spring. The recommendation is now to get us to 100% greenhouse gas reductions by 2040. And so that gets us to a requirement for buildings and homes and requirements for transportation, electricity supply, consumption, emissions, and waste, but a requirement for buildings and homes that is much more aggressive and requires the actual build outcomes to be achieving zero net energy by 2030. The checklist is intended to help us achieve that. So again, start with a plan, and then we implement it. We're always talking with the community throughout all of this. We create the enforceable regulations, and then we support everybody's success. So right now we have mandatory energy requirements, and we created this checklist to help everybody comply with those mandatory energy requirements. Those are going to keep getting steeper with each progressive code cycle, the next one being already next year in 2021. But to stay on track with Denver's goals, we are going to keep making the energy requirements become more stringent in conjunction with the community, figuring out how to do that together. The story is the same for commercial. We don't have a choice to avoid just base level code compliant buildings raising the bar, because that big green blob is the impact of all of those base level code compliant buildings. We need to close the gap between the predicted energy use of our buildings and the actual energy use. And so that just requires greater attention to the code provisions. It's also worth mentioning that we have a voluntary Denver Green Code. The first one was created in 2019. That will keep advancing as well, and that is not just for projects that want to follow the voluntary code, but it's also, it offers a preview for everybody else to see what is likely to become mandatory in the next code cycle, so that our development community can learn about what they have to do so that being compliant with the mandatory codes next time is not really hard. I'm not going to read through this slide, but this slide details the process involved with getting through the 2021 amendments to the IECC. That is the opportunity for the community to come and tell us what your priorities are. So if you're interested in being part of that dialogue, this slide just lays out where we are in the process and what the opportunities are. You can also sign up to receive our newsletter, which will provide reminders of when those opportunities for engagement come up. We do want to hear the concerns that you have with current code provisions, but please know that in the building department, we don't have the ability to just change the code on the fly. The real opportunity for changing the code is in the next code cycle with those 2021 amendments. So please get involved if you have concerns or ideas or priorities that you would like to see addressed. So just to kind of stress the three big takeaways, the amendments and the requirements and this checklist and the tools that we create are they're being created with the intent of supporting the development community and succeeding to meet the community's goals. The voluntary Denver Green Code offers a preview of what's likely to become mandatory in the future, so it's worth looking at. And the community is leading our work, so please provide us with your input. We would like to hear it. With that said, I am going to turn this over to Keith Fox to talk a little bit more about the specifics of our newest tool.
Thank you, Christy. My name is Keith Fox. I am the mechanical engineer, plan review engineer for the City and County of Denver, and I've just accepted the position of the IECC lead engineer for the City and County of Denver. So my role is combined right now with the mechanical plan review as well as the IECC lead engineer. Therefore, if you have any questions, please contact me on the IECC and I will get an answer to you as soon as possible. The IECC checklist goes into effect January 4th of 2021 for all new 1 and 2 family dwelling units and IRC townhouses, 1 and 2 family dwelling units with new condition space, and 1 and 2 family dwelling units with additions over 30% of floor area, where the increased area of the dwelling is over 30%. When these projects come into play, we will be requiring the IECC checklist to be submitted. The IECC checklist will be required to be submitted at the intake process, so you will not get through the login process until that has been approved or been accepted. The file locations where we can find the files for the new checklist. If you go to denvergov.org/building code and then scroll down, it will have the IECC checklist for all development projects. And then you'll notice there's 3 different checklists listed there. There's the residential IECC prescriptive checklist, the residential IECC performance checklist, and the residential ERI checklist. We're asking that you choose the checklist that's appropriate with the compliance path that you're utilizing for the project. So if your project is utilizing the IECC prescriptive path, then we ask you to select the IECC prescriptive checklist and fill it out. Why are we asking for the checklist? As Christy mentioned, we're using it to support the community goals of moving toward the net zero in the very near future. This is the first step that we're using to move toward outcome-based buildings, where we're going to start comparing the actual EUIs of the building and have requirements based upon that. The IECC is ever evolving. This checklist helps the city stay in alignment with the IECC. We also expect the checklist to help design teams navigate the complexities of the IECC. We're asking that to increase communication between the design teams and the plan review teams. This will help with the plan review process. and can be utilized for the design teams. We're asking for increased transparency between the design teams and the plan review teams. This is information that you're already providing through the design, and we're asking that that just be submitted and available for the plan review teams to help us review and understand your project and have a more in-depth review as we go through the review process on the project. And at this time, I'm going to share an IECC checklist. And the one that I've selected is the IECC prescriptive path. All of the checklists are similar in nature and they have the exact same format. You'll notice at the top, it calls out residential compliance checklist, and then in red, it has the prescriptive path. Make sure that the one that you're utilizing matches the path that you're utilizing for the design of the project. Then you'll notice there are blue shaded screen or cells on the checklist. The blue shaded cells are the ones that need to be filled out. So it starts with the project address, the design professional, and the date. And then we get into the checklist itself. And you'll notice, again, the blue shaded cells. Now, the other cells are not allowed to be accessed as you go through them. So you cannot click on another cell and edit it. Only the blue shaded cells can be edited. And you'll notice the checklist has columns here. It's got the plan drawing and reference number. This is a column that we're asking you to fill out where you identify where what detail and what drawing number it's shown on to show compliance. And then any submitter notes, any notes that you guys want to provide to the plan review team that'll be beneficial in the review. By identifying where it's shown on the drawings, it'll help the plan review teams provide a more in-depth review of the IECC. Then as we move down, it'll have the general scope. I'm going to back this out just a little bit. It'll have the general scope of the project. And that's where we're asking you to check which path you're utilizing and provide the construction valuation. Then after that, it has all compliance paths. These are the items that are applicable regardless of which compliance path you utilize. And it'll have what information is required to be on the drawings. It's got the EV charging requirements. And then after that, then it goes into the specific requirements for each of the paths. This one is the IECC prescriptive path. So it'll have those requirements. The spreadsheet also has the code section where it identifies which code section it is. It has the focus area, identifies the general topic of that code section. Then it has the code description here where it describes what's required in the code. Then the two columns that I mentioned before about filling out for the plan drawing and the reference number and the submitter notes. And then the last one are the submittal requirements. It identifies what we're asking to be provided on the documents. Then it does include you to identify which of the additional efficiency package options you're utilizing. Then the last item has the signature of the architect, and if applicable, it has the signature of the energy modeler. So if there's an energy modeler on the project, we're asking them to sign it as well. And we're also asking the homeowner to sign it as well on that. Then if there is an architect on the project, we're asking them to stamp and digitally sign the document. So what we're asking is you to fill out to download the document, fill it out in Excel, and then print it off to a PDF, stamp it, and add your digital signature on it. Create the PDF and then upload the PDF to the website when you go through your submittal process, the login process. Once that's done, then the documents will be verified to make sure that they're filled out, and will be turned over and accepted for review. Now, as I mentioned before, the review will not take place until this document is provided on those specific requirements. And at this time, I think we're going to open it up to questions. If anybody has any questions, I would also like to point out that this document contains information that we're assuming has already been filled out by the design team when they go through it. Please note that we have an open door policy. We would like to hear all concerns, answer all questions, and have an open dialogue for any questions or concerns that you have concerning the checklist. Please let us know if there's any way that we can improve it. We will look to do that on future iterations of the checklist. This is the first iteration that we're rolling out, and it will be changing over time. So if there are any changes that you feel would be beneficial and make this checklist an easier tool to utilize, we would appreciate it. We are anticipating that this be a tool that is utilized for the design team as well as the plan review team to improve the IECC performance. As we move closer to the predicted outcomes versus the actual outcomes, we're asking that these documents be provided to provide better information on that so that we can have a better building in the end, better outcome for the building in the end.
Keith, I have a question for you here.
Okay.
Which checklist should be used for multifamily residential projects?
For multifamily residential, that utilizes the commercial checklist. So it'll utilize one of the commercial checklists, and we had that presentation yesterday. If you missed that, it is available online. But the multifamily does utilize commercial checklist, with the exception of the IRC townhouses. So if the townhouse is designed under the IRC, then it'll utilize the residential checklist.
Thank you, Keith. If anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A and we will ask them live.
Basically, the difference between the commercial and the residential is if the project is designed under the IRC or the IBC codes. If it's designed under the IRC, it'll utilize the residential checklist, one of the paths there. If it's designed under the IBC, it'll utilize the commercial checklist in one of those paths.
We'll give it another minute for people to type in their questions into the chat.
And if anybody has any questions, my contact information is provided, both my email and my phone number. And feel free to reach out to me at any time and I'll get an answer as soon as possible.
Keith, we've got a few more questions for you.
Okay.
Does this queue up a separate reviewer or will the residential reviewer be reviewing the checklist and IECC compliance?
Currently, it's being reviewed by the residential reviewer. So they would review both the checklist and the IECC requirements at the same time of reviewing the documents for the building.
And another related question, how many reviewers are being added to the staff to review these extra documents?
Right now, we do not have the budget to add any additional reviewers. So it's being utilized with the same reviewers.
I might add a little thought to that. We are discussing team needs and future budget requests and future requests. So there is an intention to grow the team as we grow the needs. For this specific, for the review of the checklist, we think that the internal training can be handled with our existing teams. But as we continue to advance the codes forward in the future and collaborate more and more with the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability and Resiliency and the goals that the community has brought forward, we anticipate that a higher level of support will be needed, and so that those team discussions are underway. It will just be a progressive building over the coming years.
That's a very good point to bring up.
Keith, have you had any issues with signatures becoming invalid if they are obtained from different parties? Okay,
and that is the reason that we are asking that the top items, these signatures and names are only physical signatures. Only the stamp and the digital signature is required if there's an architect. Therefore, only one person will be digitally signing it, and we should not have a problem with invalid signatures in that case.
Keith, is an energy modeling report required for residential projects?
No, there's not an energy modeling report required for the residential projects. That's for commercial projects.
Keith, is there a quick reference or resource that lays out the prescriptive requirements for insulation and windows, or are those found in the checklist themselves?
It's found in the IECC code, and then the checklist just summarizes what's in the IECC code.
We have a question here about yesterday's presentation being on the website. The presentation hasn't actually been posted to the website yet. It is on our YouTube channel. We are currently experiencing just a brief website freeze, so we can't actually link that video to the website right at this moment. It'll be up on Thursday, but right now you can find it on Denver Community Planning and Development's YouTube channel under the webinar playlist. Keith, one more question for you. Do we still need to provide the HERS and Manual J each type approved submittal?
Yes, we do. We are asking for those on those submittals. One more thing that I would like to add, just so that everybody is aware, Denver is currently working on having the ResCheck program updated if you choose the IECC prescriptive path. So the ResCheck program is supposed to be updated in the near future. We're still working on that, but it would include all of the Denver amendments, and that's not available at the moment. But we're hoping to have that available sometime early next year.
Keith, how much do we anticipate this to extend the time for the review process?
We're actually hoping that it doesn't extend the review process. We're hoping that by providing this information that it'll make it easier for the plan reviewers to go through the drawings and review it for the IECC is the goal with this tool.
Keith and Christy, you may want to weigh in on this as well. How many construction companies are being included in your conversations related to progressing the energy code?
So I can talk to that a little bit. We have kind of a process that is going through various different engagements with different committees, and each committee always reaches out to the construction industry. We are looping in construction companies. I couldn't give you a number, but each committee generally seeks to have several different representatives from different types of construction sectors, and it's super important that we have that input. Our meetings are also open to the public, and we welcome more people to come to those committee meetings as well. As we go through the 2021 amendments code cycle, we will be very certain to have a diverse group at the table as part of the committee, but we would love to see more people come to the room to share their voice during those conversations as well.
Keith, if there is not an architect, but there is an engineer on the project, must the engineer seal it, or does the homeowner need to sign it and seal it?
If there's a licensed engineer on the project, they would need to stamp and sign it with the digital signature.
Keith,
Now,
will
if there's both an architect and an engineer, then only the engineer would need to stamp and provide the digital signature. Only the architect.
Thank you. Keith, will you still accept ResCheck while we wait for the update? If not, what should we be using until it is available?
We have a policy on our website on how to handle that. So we accept the 2018 IECC ResCheck with a couple of additional information that needs to be provided on that. And that's all documented in our policy on the checklist transition period. I mean the ComCheck in ResCheck transition period.
We have time for a few last questions. If anybody has additional questions, please type them into the Q&A chat.
I would like to thank everybody for joining us. And again, if anybody has any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me.
Keith, we have one last question before we sign off here. If there is not an architect, but there is an engineer on the, oh, we already have this one. Okay, as the engineer's, I'm sorry, now I'm just reading this out loud. As the engineer's scope may only require one discipline, i.e. power or mechanical, does it make sense to have the engineer seal the whole list, essentially certifying other disciplines?
I might weigh in on this one just to say that the intention of the signing and the sealing is to have the design professional who's leading the collaborated effort together sign and seal and express an understanding of the content of the whole checklist. If that engineer is only serving in a very limited capacity on the project but not actually acting in that capacity, then we don't need them to sign and seal the whole report. The intention is that that sign and seal is associated with somebody who is familiar with what's happening under all of the trades.
We have another question about yesterday's presentation. Just to remind everybody, yesterday's presentation is available on Denver Community Planning and Development's YouTube channel. It will be made available on the website on Thursday. But Keith, there is a question about the transition period. Can you please explain the transition period one more time?
For the ResCheck, because since we don't have ResCheck available for the Denver specific requirements, there's a policy that has that on there. And I assume that you're asking about the transition of the ResCheck. And with that, we're asking that the 2018 National Res Check be utilized with a couple of additional requirements. Now with ComCheck is available updated for the Denver specific, and it's currently available on the DOE website with the Denver specific code on there on the desktop version only. The web version is anticipated to come out shortly. Now, I'm not sure if your question was about that or if your question is about the transition period of the checklist. Currently, we have the checklist available online, and it's optional if you want to take a look at it and utilize it and submit it, because we are anticipating that it is a useful tool both for the design team and for the plan review team. So if you want to utilize it, you're welcome to do that. Then starting on January 4th, it'll be required on all new 1 and 2 family dwellings, 1 and 2 family dwellings with more than 30% increase for an addition, and 1 and 2 family dwellings with a new conditioned space, such as like a tenant or a basement finish, and then also all new IRC townhouses.
Thank you, Keith. And with that, I think that's it for today. Keith, if anybody has any additional questions, how can they reach you?
You can reach me by either email or by phone. My phone number and my email are both listed on the last slide on this presentation.
Thank you all for joining us today. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to Keith directly. We will post this video as well on our website. Look for it, please, on Thursday. And you can find it on our YouTube channel as well. Thank you all for joining us.